Thank you, Donald, and good evening, everybody. Well, a Spanish prosecutor has asked the judge to issue a European arrest warrant for the ousted Catalan leader, Carles Puigdemont. This is after he and four of his closest allies failed to comply with a summons to appear in court in Madrid today. They were, of course, in Brussels, being photographed drinking coffee in a bar. But some of the Catalan politicians did turn up and appeared before Judge Carmen Lamela, and 8 of them have been remanded in jail. A 9th will be set free if he pays a bond of €50,000. The hearings have been adjourned, and on the 9th of November is the time in which they've got to prepare their defence. So the Spanish authorities are not mucking about, and there are 20 Catalan figures and politicians who face charges of rebellion, sedition, and misuse of public funds. And regulars to the show will remember that rebellion alone carries a maximum jail term of 30 years. Now, if this arrest warrant gets issued, and it seems to me that it's just procedural now, given that the prosecutor has asked for it, and given that 8 people are there in prison, it's virtually impossible to see how a snap election can take place on the 21st of December that could possibly be described to be a free and fair election. I think that's virtually impossible. And I wonder, where are the voices that I've heard for 18 years as a member of the European Parliament, where they scream human rights every time a Central or Eastern European government does something they don't like? Well, they've been incredibly silent today. So the arrest warrant is now merely a formality. And I'm asking you whether you think that the prospect of Puigdemont being arrested, taken back to appear before a court in Madrid and put in prison, whether you think this is justified. You know, perhaps you think it's way too heavy-handed. Yes, OK, he did declare UDI, but surely negotiation might be a better way forward. If that's how you feel, call me on 0345 6060 973. Maybe you think, actually, do you know what? This guy has just ridden a coach and horses through the Spanish constitution. He's behaved illegally. He deserves what's coming to him, in which case text at 84850. Or maybe you think that actually the Catalonian people deserve to have their voice heard, in which case tweet using the hashtag Farage and LBC, and you can watch me on Facebook and comment there. I'm live from here in New York, a New York that is still in quite a fair degree of shock after the horrors of 2 days ago. I know that Puigdemont acted outside the law, but he did appear to be running quite a successful campaign where public opinion was coming on his side because of the way in which Spanish police had behaved. If you remember the day they held that referendum back on the 1st of October, 900 people injured by Spanish police attempting to stop them voting. And I felt he was winning in many ways. I have to say, my own view is that if you are the leader of a genuine independence movement, when the going gets tough, I think the last thing you do is disappear off to Brussels. You know, 1 minute he declares a UDI, the next he's slapped down by Rajoy and the Spanish government, and before you know it, he's on a plane and off in Brussels. And I don't think that of itself is particularly impressive. I think those that are fighting for independence sometimes, frankly, have to go to prison en route to get what they want. But it's the behaviour of the Spanish government that I'm asking you about tonight. Is their behaviour justified? They've put 8 people, 8 Catalan politicians are now in prison. Puigdemont is about to have a European arrest warrant issued for him to hoik him back to Madrid. Is this fair and reasonable conduct, or is it completely over the top? Alan in Mill Hill is my first caller on this subject. Good evening, Alan.
Hello, hi, good evening. Hello, Nigel.
Good evening. Well, it's very kind of you. New caller to the show. Alan, what motivated you? How do you feel about this?
It is because the fact that I'm seeing this is an episode that would be clearly and very closely watched by Erdogan. He did the same thing with Kurdish politicians, and he got away with it. And, Turkey is with Europe, or proximity of Europe, and seeing what they've done in Spain, it's like justified what he has done with Kurds, because they were exactly the same, in a way similar, but they didn't hold a referendum there. They just wanted their political rights, and they were all elected politicians, mind you, and he chucked them all in prisons. Now, what Spain did is it's for me, it's really bizarre because they are elected. They have 2.5 million. I don't know what the numbers. Maybe someone else can correct me here, but they have been elected by numbers of people, so they're elected.
They've certainly got a couple of million votes, Alan, and the separatist cause, which 10 to 15 years ago was a minority sport running at 15 to 20%, the last time we saw was somewhere in the low 40s. So certainly Puigdemont's campaign has been gaining momentum, has been gaining credibility, but Alan, right now, he's sitting in a bar in Brussels. It's not that impressive, really, is it?
Nigel, I mean, can you just picture that with me? Say if Scotland wanted to hold a referendum and Britain calls it illegal, would they actually do what Spain has done? I would never.
Well, it's a very good question, Alan. It's a really, really good question, and it is worth pointing out. Although I've never been a fan of politically, I mean, personally, Alex Salmond is very, very personable and charming and fun, but politically, I've never been a fan of Salmond or Sturgeon because I've always thought the use of this word independence was actually fraudulent, given that they wanted to stay part of the European Union. But you'll notice, Alan, that all the way through that, Salmond, in the run-up to that referendum, was always very careful, wasn't he, to stay the right side of the law. He was meticulous about that. Had he broken the law, do you think the British government would have arrested him and put him in prison?
Now, this is a very good question from your part as well, Nigel, but let me put that to you. The laws that has been set in place in Spain, some of it was changed by the same Rajoy who actually sort of on a vendetta sort of course of trying to get to imprison all those people, the Catalan people, who are actually calling for independence. Now, this is very important. Nigel, please hear me out. In I don't know how many months ago, actually maybe a year, he got few of the judges who had their terms completely ended, finished. They could have been like retired and all that. He got them together to change some of the laws, which now he actually using against Puigdemont and the others. This is very important, and not to forget, please, Nigel, that the PP, the Partido Popular, the Popular Party, is actually the same party that was set up by Franco, the fascist Franco.
Well, Alan, we could look at families in German politics or Austrian politics. I'm not sure that's helpful, but I do think, as you do, that Rajoy has behaved incredibly badly. I find it difficult to look at the way Spain's behaving to call it a 21st century modern democracy, don't you?
I absolutely agree with you, but this is not the way to go about solving an existential, if you like, political problem that Spain is facing. This is not the right way, because he will antagonize a section of Catalonians, and he did already.
Well, I think he will too. No, Alan, I've felt all the way through this that Catalonian separatism gets closer with every action of the Spanish government, and it may well be a calculation that Puigdemont's in Brussels because he wants a European arrest warrant to martyr him, and maybe that's his thinking. I just sort of think it's a bit odd that he's sitting there in Brussels. Alan from Mill Hill, I thank you very much. The ousted Catalan leaders should move to Gibraltar, as the Catalonian government in exile suggests. Richard, well, that really would be red rags to the Spanish bull, would it not? I think people need to be heard. What happened to innocent until proven guilty? Free them and let them stand on the 21st of December. Do you know, to me, if those elections on the 21st of December are not held on a free and fair basis, then Spain begins to look like a banana republic. And I've been tweeting and saying this for the last 2 to 3 weeks. If these guys are all going to be in prison and unable to campaign, those elections are a farce. And I still stand by the view that I said on Sunday, on the Sunday edition of this show. I think the only way this can be settled is to have a free and fair referendum and let both sides fight it out, and let's get a result that both sides are prepared to respect. Mind you, not everybody in the UK, of course, is respecting our referendum, but there we are. We've got a call from Costa Rica. Matthew is calling from Costa Rica. Good morning, I guess it is there, Matthew.
Yes, it's still morning. Good afternoon to you, Nigel.
Yes, okay, well done. On the ball.
Right. Well, I think first of all, you'll agree with me when I say I think I'd rather be in prison in Madrid than stuck in Belgium on political asylum.
Well, yeah. It's certainly, if you got my mugshot and my name, Brussels is not a very welcoming place. That is true. But I mean, how do you think Puigdemont's playing this?
Yeah, well, I think he's playing it terribly, and I disagree with you on this particular issue. I think that Catalan independence is actually getting further away now. I really don't think that Puigdemont should be doing a Julian Assange hiding out in Belgium. I think really it's doing a disgrace to national or regional pride, depending on how you want to look at it, in Catalonia. Yep. And the man's done already incredible damage to Catalonia. The Spanish newspaper ABC reported that 7 out of 10 Catalan companies have already moved to the Madrid region. So I think he just needs to come back and face the music now.
All right, so you really, Matthew, have little sympathy for Puigdemont or the way in which he's behaved?
None whatsoever. I mean, no. I do think that the sentence is a little bit heavy-handed, but I would remind you that is the maximum, so it's up to 30 years, not necessarily 30 years.
Sure.
But so of course he's worried about jail, but he knew that what he was doing was illegal. It's misuse of public funds, and he went ahead and did it anyway.
Yeah, no, Matthew, I think he should have stood there and faced the music, and I think he would have looked like a stronger leader had he stayed where he was, unless it's part of some master plan that he actually wants to be extradited under a European arrest warrant. Don't know. Matthew from Costa Rica, I thank you. Kevin agrees with you. He says 100% not heavy-handed. He deserves his punishment, as do the others. They broke the law and caused chaos as elected members, and then the leader does a runner, leaving the rest to face the consequences. Kevin, I've become more supportive of the Catalan position, just given the appalling barbarity we saw from the Spanish police, but I find it difficult to disagree with the point that he does appear to rather run away. You're listening to the Nigel Farage Show, with 8 Catalan politicians now in prison, a 9th about to go out on bail, and Mr. Puigdemont, the leader, in Brussels with 4 of his closest advisers facing the prospect of a European arrest warrant to hike him back to Madrid and no doubt put him in prison too. I'm asking whether this is fair, justified, or whether it simply is too heavy-handed. On Twitter, Nigel Farage talks about respecting referenda results when he said he'd demand a rerun if Remain had won. 52-48, pure hypocrisy, says James. Oh, James, please, I didn't demand a rerun. Do you know what? Had the Remain side won the referendum in June 16, there would have been no prospect of another referendum for many, many years to come. A legal referendum in Catalonia is a great idea as long as both sides tell the truth when campaigning, says Ian. Well, you know, one man's truth is another man's deception, but I do think the only way this gets solved is through a full, free and fair referendum. Varno has more sympathy for Mr. Puigdemont and the Catalan cause. He said it's a disgrace how they deal with people who like freedom. Well, it's a real disgrace, Varno, when people want to go out on a Sunday morning and express an opinion and get dragged out of polling stations and 900 of them get injured. Unbelievable behaviour from a country that we're in political union with. Felix is calling from Holborn. Good evening, Felix.
Good evening, Nigel. Thank you for taking my call.
Not one bit. How do you feel about this?
Well, I think an important point that I think often gets missed is that the EU really does not miss an opportunity to appropriate, the values of democracy and human rights for itself, but then it doesn't enforce them, and indeed often goes against them as an institution. So you have these, the Catalans trying to hold a legal referendum, Spain simply not allowing them to hold a constitutionally legal referendum, and then the EU not doing anything about it. And to me, it's just completely baffling. Especially when... do
you know, Felix, the number of times I've heard Mr. Juncker and his predecessor, who was there, Mr. Barroso, and indeed Martin Schulz, when he was president of the European Parliament before he went off to try and take on Angela Merkel. The number of times I've heard these senior figures in the European Union talk about peace. You know, we have kept the peace. Without us, there would have been war in Europe. We brought democracy to Eastern Europe. We brought down the Berlin Wall. We are the organisation who is here for good, for human rights, for a better, fairer, decent world. And yet, when they see... Frankly, I mean, I think what happened on October the 1st was a human rights abuse. Genuinely, I do. And when they see it and it doesn't suit them, Felix, they don't say a blooming thing, do they?
Yeah. No, and I'm from Luxembourg myself, so you know, Mr. Juncker was my prime minister until a few years back, and I think you know, in the EU and especially in Luxembourg, we have lost sight of what we hold dear. You know, what our, or at least my great-grandparents fought for, namely independence. And we've lost sight of why we wanted that. And we are giving away, at least in Luxembourg, our sovereignty to the EU, and the Catalans aren't being allowed to you know, determine their own government, which is crazy.
No, but it's fascinating, Felix. I mean, I've got a tweet here. Are Catalonia not falling for an EU trap? Did the EU not always want regions over countries? This may be suiting the EU, says Lisa. What I've seen happen with this, Felix, is the European Union encouraged the breakup of countries into strong regions. It's why they were so pro the Scottish movement to break away from the UK. But up until now, Felix, all these little regional groups that have wanted to break away from their own nation states have all wanted to be part of the European club. For the first time, what we see in Catalonia is a breakaway group that doesn't want to be part of the European club. And doesn't that explain their behaviour, Felix, more than anything else?
I think to an extent, sure, but I think what more explains the EU's behaviour is just its simple undecisiveness, and that it can't really make up its mind about these key issues. And of course, it wants to remain in power. So the status quo is for it. Is the best outcome for the...
I think, Felix, they have made their mind up. I'm going to disagree a bit with you at the end here. They have made their mind up. They see Spain as being a key pillar of centralising the European Union deeper still than it is today, and they see Catalonia as potentially being a disaster, something that would make Brexit look like a Sunday afternoon picnic, and that's why they've chosen the course of action they have. I thank you. Theo says on Facebook, if he had stayed in Catalonia, this would have been in vain. It's about a political persecution, and if he is to be arrested, this should be carried out abroad so that the whole world can see the true face of the EU. Theo, I accept that maybe this is his calculation. Maybe his calculation is that he's hiked out of a Brussels coffee bar, put on a plane, made to appear in Madrid, chucked in jail, and that gives him martyrdom status in Catalonia. I personally suspect it would have been better for his perspective and for their cause if he'd stayed in the government buildings and been arrested there. That's my view. Robert in Hendon is calling. Robert, good evening.
Yes, hello, good evening, Nigel.
What is your view on this, Robert? What is your interest in it?
Well, my interest is a concern that the world is fragmenting more and more and more away from nation states to whoever or whatever fragmented minority is interested in breaking away.
Well,
and the kind of chaos.
Well, Robert, actually, on the long view, I'm going to disagree with you, because in 1945 there were about 55 countries in the world, okay? There are now about nearly 230 countries in the world. So what's been happening over the course of the last 70 years is that, you know, full states, those with lines drawn on maps or empires, have been breaking down, but they've been breaking down into recognisable nation states on the principle of national self-determination. So I feel that the world's become more pro-nation state over the course of these decades, apart from Europe, who've convinced themselves to go in the opposite direction. But you fear further fragmentation of identifiable units, Robert, yeah?
Yes, I do, and I also think that being an Israeli, for instance, I find that the Palestinian trying to break away, or rather in some way self-declare, even despite the fact that the Palestinians in Israel would rather stay in the...
Well, Robert, that is a uniquely difficult issue, and we will debate that fully on another day. But Robert there from Hendon, scared about fragmentation. My counter is, actually, there are a lot more nation-states around the world than there were. I think it's a pretty good and a pretty healthy thing. Angela says, is Spain calling the shots or the EU? Angela, the Spanish government is calling the shots with the absolute full support of the European Union. You know, we saw Franz Timmermans, Juncker's number 2, making the point after the 1st of October, after 900 people were injured, Timmermans made the point that necessary force sometimes has to be used. Antonio is calling me from Willesden. Antonio, good evening.
Nigel, good evening. A pleasure to talk to you again.
Pleasure to talk to you. So, is all this fair and reasonable, Antonio? I mean, you could argue that Puigdemont and the gang have ignored the national parliament, ignored the national government, gone ahead with a referendum that wasn't sanctioned, declared UDI. I mean, is it reasonable to think they deserve what's being done to them?
Absolutely, and I'll tell you why. Carles Puigdemont, and I go back to Arturo Mas, who is at the moment trying to crowdfund to pay off a fine for doing something similar, yeah? Carlos Puigdemont, Arturo Mas, and company not only run roughshod over Spain's constitution, Nigel, and you have to, I'm Portuguese, my grandfather was a Spanish Basque who ran for his life, okay? We have long memories of how this happened the last time. I was born into a fascist state in Portugal, so I have heavy memories of all of this. But there's one thing that's really important. Carles Puigdemont, right, not only disobeyed Spain's constitution, of which Catalonia voted 91% in favor in 1978, right, he also ran roughshod over Catalan democracy. The people who declared this referendum illegal was the Constitutional Court of Catalonia, okay? And I put something else to you. With an Iberian mind, all right? It says in the Spanish Constitution, for a reason, right? The Constitution covers all peoples of Spain, right? And it does that for a reason, because of the long memory we all had of the Spanish Civil War. This guy and his cronies, I'm sorry to say, and I'm a little bit intimate with the whole subject, right? I've done something close to treason.
Antonio, and that is the view that Rajoy is taking, and you know, that is why they're going to face these charges. You know, they're going to face charges of sedition and misuse of public money and rebellion. I understand what you're saying, but Antonio, just very quickly, if the people of Catalonia wish to express an opinion about their future, should they be denied?
Nigel, there is a legal mechanism in Spain.
Okay, well, let's hope, Antonio, that these elections, which are a legal mechanism, which take place on the 21st of December, let's hope, Antonio, for everyone's sake, they're free and fair. The Catalans have broken the Spanish constitution, they've held an illegal referendum, they've declared UDI, and there are many of you who think they're getting their just desserts by being chucked in prison, and Puigdemont about to have a European arrest warrant put upon him. I have to say, I don't take that view. They may well have played fast and loose with the law, but I do think that the only way you solve a situation like this is to have a full, free and fair referendum. What Rajoy, the Spanish PM, has proposed are elections on the 21st of December, but if the leading contenders for separation are in prison, difficult to see how they could be full, free and fair elections. Here in New York, US President Donald Trump has repeated calls for the suspect in the New York truck attack to get the death penalty. The suspect himself has been interviewed, has said he felt good about Tuesday's Halloween killings. He wanted to kill as many people as he possibly could. As it was, there were 5 Argentinians who were in New York to celebrate 30 years since their high school graduation, a young mother from Belgium, and 2 Americans who died. Mr. Saipov, the Uzbek immigrant, was shot at the scene. He's being held in hospital under guard. Initially, Trump said he wanted to send him to Guantanamo Bay, but he's decided that actually is a much too slow a process. And Trump's tweet today is, should move fast, death penalty. This is not inconsistent. Trump in the past has paid for adverts in newspapers after horrible things have happened, saying, bring back the death penalty. I wonder what will happen. Because this will be a federal prosecution, it will go over New York state law. New York is a state that does not have the death penalty, but at a federal level, the death penalty could be applied. And there are many states in America that still do conduct the death penalty. When I was younger, I always thought the death penalty was the right, just thing. I now have a slightly different view. I don't really want the state to have that much power over our lives. But the US president, very clear in what he thinks. Okay, back to this debate. Should Mr. Puigdemont be dragged back from Brussels, put before a court in Madrid and put in prison for what he's done? And I'm going to Andalusia in Spain to speak to Phoebe. Good evening, Phoebe.
Hi, how are you doing? First of all, I'm sorry because English is not really my first language.
Well, I tell you what, it sounds pretty good to me, Phoebe. So you're in a completely separate region in Spain. How does the behaviour of the Catalan separatists look to you?
Well, here's the thing: is I used to live in Catalonia for 3 years. And I do agree with you regarding that we should have a legal referendum. The problem that I see right now in Catalonia is that I don't see that we can have a really objective point of view. Because ever since the Constitution was ratified by more than 90% of Catalans, by the way, in 1978,
yep.
What the Catalan government has done is use their autonomous powers to indoctrinate people. And I can give you a couple of examples. For example, one of my friends that is a Spanish language teacher in a high school, as soon as he started showing, posts on Facebook that he doesn't agree with the process that they are going through, he got fired. So whoever really works in the public sector in Catalonia who doesn't agree with their views, you have problems. You either get fired, you get looked down upon. And this has been going on for 4 decades. They teach even in the books. What they teach kids is that Catalonia was a kingdom when it wasn't. That the Spanish have always oppressed Catalans, which hasn't been true. And actually, I had to come back from there because the whole situation was untenable. I know that
Phoebe, living there, did you feel uncomfortable with the nature of the Catalan separatist sort of sentiment?
The problem there is that it's really not a majority, but they are the ones who control the government. So if you live there, you have a pressure. Only recently, when the people, the ones that they call unionists, have really come out with the Spanish flags.
Yeah.
You feel a little bit more comfortable, but that has only been very recent. Before that, no, you really feel the pressure that you either have to go quiet or you're going to fight with everybody,
Phoebe, do you think, as I do, that only by having a full, free and fair referendum can this issue be resolved? Because if you're right, those that wish to remain part of Spain would win that referendum.
I do agree.
Okay,
yes, definitely.
Well, tell Mr. Rajoy that's the way out, because even though Mr. Rajoy, Phoebe, has got the rule of law on his side, he's looking a little bit thuggish the way he's going about it. Phoebe, from Andalusia, great call, very interesting perspective, making the point that, right through the public sector, they've actually been using the separatists, the organs of government, to push their point of view. That's Phoebe's experience. Others may think differently to that. The Catalan government broke the law and should face the consequences. What's there to talk about? Nothing to do with the EU or anything else. Lots of you have that view. Why these guys should be exceptions? We should make the rules up as convenient and change them? No. Yes, they should be arrested. Rick says we all know that the Spanish government will not allow the Catalans to have a proper referendum because they know the Catalans will vote to leave. Rick, we don't know the Catalans would vote to leave. We know that prior to the referendum that took place on the 1st of October, prior to that, it was always seen that the Catalans were in a minority. There was a 43% turnout in that referendum, 92% of whom voted for separation. If you had a full referendum and the turnout was 80% or 83% or whatever it might be, who's to say? I don't know who would win, but I don't see any other way of solving it. Felix, another Felix, is calling from Beckenham, a new caller too. Felix, good evening.
Hello, Nigel. Good evening. 2 points. The referendum was illegal, according to the Spanish Constitution, which was agreed by a referendum where over 90% of Catalans agreed. That's
Felix, I think that it's indisputable that they did not have permission to hold that referendum, but Felix, shouldn't people be able to express an opinion if they want to?
Yes, but from the law to the law. They have to start from the law, obey the law, and they haven't obeyed the law. And now the situation is in the hands of the judiciary, in the court, and they should be allowed to carry on with that, with the court doing what they are doing. It's nothing to do with Rajoy. It's nothing to do with the Partido Popular. It is the courts that are running this situation.
Because they're upholding the Spanish Constitution. Okay, fine, Felix, your second point?
Well, the second point I was going to make is that it is the judiciary that are running this, and Puigdemont should go back to Spain to face the music.
Okay, so you have no sympathy for Puigdemont. And do you have any sympathy, Felix, for the 93% of people who went out on October the 1st and voted for Catalonia to leave Spain?
You don't believe that referendum was done properly, do you?
I think it was imperfect in many ways, but what I do know is, a couple of million people went out and voted for Catalonia to leave Spain. Now, they may well, Felix, still be in a minority, but don't they, in a free country, which it's supposed to be in Spain, don't they have the right, somehow, to be given the chance to express their view?
Yes, but they have to change the Constitution. They have to go from the law to the law. They cannot break the law to get their way. They have to change the Constitution first.
And what if they can't change the Constitution?
Sorry?
What if they can't change the Constitution?
If they can change the Constitution, I don't know. Do you know that a part of Catalonia is now asking for independence from Catalonia? Do you know that? That is where it would take us if we allow all these sort of things. That is where it would end. Every part of all over Europe end up independent with 1,000 little regions.
I don't think they would, Felix. I genuinely don't think they would. I'm just making the point that people who wish to express an opinion have to be given, if you're living in a democracy, a means of expressing it. And my worry, Felix, is that by Rajoy saying he'll have these elections on the 21st of December, and I just put this point to you quickly, if those elections go ahead with Puigdemont and the others in prison, that would not be reasonable, would it?
No, I agree with that.
Yeah, okay, well that's fine. Felix, I understand your passion. You want Spain to stay together. You think they behave badly. I understand it, but I don't think the Spanish government, in the eyes of international opinion, are particularly helping themselves. So the Catalans have not obeyed the Spanish Constitution when they held that referendum, when they declared UDI, and there's some very passionate callers with Spanish heritage saying they want Spain to stay together. And I understand that. I get that. But surely surely, if people want to express an opinion, it's dangerous not to allow them to do it. Madalena says to me on Facebook, it's not down to the Catalans to have a referendum, it's for the whole of Spain. There is a constitution, we can't forget that, just because it suits your own anti-EU agenda. Look, Madalena, what if the Spanish Parliament refuses for a year, for 5 years, for 10 years, for 20 years to refuse to give the Catalans a referendum? We had a very similar situation here on EU membership. All I'm saying is, Madalena, that I think the way out of this is to have a full, free and fair referendum. That is my view. I wonder what Annabelle, who's calling all the way from Los Angeles, thinks. Good afternoon, Annabelle.
Good afternoon. How are you?
I'm very well indeed, thank you. So, do you have a stake in this Spanish-Catalan debate?
I don't, but I have a friend who actually lives in Catalonia right now as we speak.
Yeah.
And I asked her about the vote and what was going on. And I'll just read a little bit of what she said to you, or to me. She said, I asked her about, were you there the day of the vote? I'd love to hear from someone who was there and witnessed it. And she said, I was there, yes. Actually, as I don't approve of it, I didn't go to vote, so I didn't see all the violence. But there were many pictures in the news that were actually from 2014, not from this time. And she said, the thing is that they owe Spain a lot of money, and to create a new country would be so expensive that they would get very poor, and it would be a problem, and she doesn't know what will happen. And
yeah, I mean, there is an argument that companies have left already or threatened to leave, and that financially they might be worse off. But, you know, Annabelle, very often, independence movements, I mean, when countries were breaking away from the British Empire, the argument wasn't about being richer or poorer. The argument was about being free and having their own identity. So, whether the economic arguments are right or not, I just don't think, Annabelle, that those 2 million people that voted in that referendum to leave Spain, I can't see them changing their mind in a hurry.
Oh, no, I totally agree. I mean, you're talking to an American, don't forget. But I think they should bide their time a little bit because, think about how much it costs to set up embassies in other countries.
Yep.
The territorial army. And, it just seems like they've taken a pretty bad time to do it. Although I can see, from like a political point of view or a political standpoint, they picked a great time to do it because, you guys are doing your Brexit, and I've heard like there's a vote going on in Italy about do they want to have more freedom from the EU. There is the next big political event in Europe that is coming up is the Italian elections, which will take place early next year, and in some ways, the European Union will dominate all of that. And we've just had, Annabelle, we've just had the Czech Republic go very Eurosceptic, the Austrians go very Eurosceptic. So there's a lot of, there is a huge amount of turmoil going on. But Annabelle, your point that maybe they're not quite ready for this and should bide their time is a very valuable one. And thank you for calling all the way from LA. Fred in Heathrow says, why Belgium? Would it not have been more sensible to have run away to Andorra? After all, it is the only 100% Catalan-speaking country in the world and is not part of the European Union. Good point, Fred. But I'm beginning to think maybe Puigdemont's thinking is that the European arrest warrant gets issued, he gets dragged back there, that gives him a degree of martyrdom. I'm still not sure that, frankly, being in Brussels at the time when 8 of his colleagues get put in prison, when he's sitting there in a coffee shop, I'm not sure that chaotic press conference we saw on Monday, I don't think it's looked very good, personally, I have to say. I can see Catalonia doing really well, remaining with Spain, with more devolved powers. As they are staying in the EU, their people will continue to prosper, says Matt. Well, some would say that's not the case, but is simply having more devolved powers is that really enough to satisfy those people who turned out on the 1st of October? I'm not sure it is. Isabel is calling me from Suffolk. Isabel, good evening.
Oh, hello, good evening. I'm very, very happy to speak to you. My husband and I are great fans of yours.
Well, that's very sweet of you, Isabel. And how do you feel about this? How do you feel about Spain and Catalonia and what's been going on?
Well, I'm Spanish. I'm Spanish, and I am half Spanish, half Catalan. So I would say that I know what I'm talking about, and I can tell you from some of your callers that just spoke to you that It's not true. Nobody is bullying anybody for being from a different place at all in Catalonia. Catalonia is a very, very rich and cultural area of what you call Spain. But I truly believe that now, after I've seen what's happening, how the government is treating everybody, how the police is treating everybody, I really see now that we should be independent. And we can still trade with Spain. We can still trade with everywhere in the world, the same as Brexit.
So Isabel, let me just ask you this. Is it the behaviour of the Spanish police and Rajoy's government, is it that has turned your mind in the course of the last month or so?
No, I always wanted to have some sort of independence because it's a culturally totally different country, and I'm not happy with Europe as it is, as such. So I didn't vote Brexit because I am not British, therefore I cannot vote. But my husband voted Brexit. So the whole package together, I think we're better off being without Spain and being without the big wolves in Brussels.
No, Isabel, you've made the point very clearly, but you realise that if and when that referendum comes, the people in Catalonia will be told that all the businesses will leave, they'll be poorer, it'll be a disaster. I mean, when that referendum comes, can you predict at the moment which way you think it will go?
Well, how can we get poorer when we have businesses, where we have people that are willing to work, where we're going to have new businesses building up in Catalonia, where people are going to realise that, excuse me, there's not a big scary thing to be independent. It's not a big scary thing to be out of the EU. We can still deal with everybody. We can still set up businesses. We have a lot of beautiful areas for tourism. Come on, it's just a scarymonger's. No, it's not going to happen, Nigel.
Isabel, thank you so much for your call. Isabel, they're making the Eurosceptic point for Catalan independence. And it's arguments like Isabel's that frighten the life out of Jean-Claude Juncker, the President of the European Commission, which is why last weekend he was saying the cracks are beginning to show in Europe. And my last caller on this subject this evening is Luke in Croydon, who's a new caller to the show. Luke, good evening.
Good evening, Nigel. How are you doing?
I'm doing fine. So what do you think? Is Puigdemont a bad guy or a good guy?
Well, I can't say there is a straight answer to that, but my instinct is telling me that he should face the music, because Catalonia is a rich area of Spain, yes, but they didn't build everything on their own. They did benefited from all the infrastructure built by the Spanish government, so they do have their part to paying the debt that Spain owes as well. So if they want to leave, that's not the biggest issue. But the biggest issue is, how do you do that? How do you go around your things? That's where they got it wrong. That's how I am concerned.
Well, some would say the British government are grappling with that issue right at the moment with the European Union. So you think that there needs to be more practical discussion from the Catalan separatists as to how they're going to do it before they really become legitimate?
Definitely, they needed to do that. They had to do that. And then also because Spain is just about to recover from a very difficult economic period they've been going through. So it's not at that particular moment that the richest part of the country will say, well, we're out. You are out. Where are you going?
But they need some more plans. Yeah. Luke, thank you so much for your call. And finally, on Twitter, I get, Nigel, you are a staunch supporter of democracy. Please respect the 60% plus who do not want independence in Catalonia or did not vote. Well, the point about that is the people who don't vote in elections don't count. But there were many that boycotted that referendum on the 1st of October because they thought it was illegal. This needs to be brought to a head with a full, free and fair referendum. It's the only peaceable, sensible way this is going to get resolved. I don't know which side would win that referendum. I have no idea who would win, but I can't see any other way of solving it.